The Atlanta Hawks season is over, and they now enter an uncertain offseason with an important decision around Trae Young looming, but also a very interesting young core of players. What exactly is the plan in Atlanta? Now, the decision around Trae Young that I'm sure most of you are thinking about is whether or not he is going to get traded. Is he going to suddenly be on the trade market either because the Hawks decide to move him or because he wants out? And that is certainly an interesting possibility, but more importantly, arguably for Atlanta, is the fact that Trae Young is a 2026 free agent. That means two things for them. One, they have to decide if they're willing to commit a gigantic new $60+ $70+ million contract extension to Trae Young, or risk the possibility of him going to 2026 free agency and seeing what the market is willing to pay him then. And I think that is as informative of whether or not he's going to get traded this offseason as anything else, because this is the most leverage that Trae Young has had throughout his career to force a trade in Atlanta. There were times early on in his career, even when he was still on a rookie contract, that we were getting reports that he was unhappy about the amount of help that he was getting, about how many games the Hawks were winning. And although a lot of that stuff has quieted down, I would not be surprised if he's now looking at his situation in Atlanta and seeing a younger roster, seeing a team that's gotten rid of some veterans over the last couple of years, and realizing that his chances to win a title are much better with another team around the league. And if he was to decide that, having that 2026 free agency hanging over Atlanta gives him a ton of leverage, because if they wait until next year, they could possibly just lose him for nothing. And although that's concerning for Atlanta, I wouldn't be surprised if they decided that maybe it was the best move for them to go ahead and move on from Trae Young anyway, even if he doesn't ask. Now, that also brings up the interesting question of whether there's actually a giant market for him, and we're going to get to that later, but that's the big step one for Atlanta, is what's the future of Trae Young? Now, around him, they have a pretty interesting core. Onyeka Okongwu's 24, Jalen Johnson's 23, Dyson Daniels is 22, but he's a 2026 restricted free agent, and Zachary Richichet, the first overall pick in the draft, is 20 and had a really strong end to the season. Those guys plus Trae Young is a really nice starting five, and they got some other guys off the bench that are pretty interesting as well. And it's clear that the current team isn't good enough to be maybe more than a play-in team without some major leaps from guys like Richichet, and even if that did happen, they're unlikely to reach contender status, but that's not necessarily a reason to go ahead and blow it up and tank next season after trading away Trae Young. And the money part of this is complicating as well. We've already talked about Trae Young and the possible extension he would be up for, but Dyson Daniels is going to need a new deal as well. Jalen Johnson is already on a big new contract where he's making $30+ million a year. Okongwu's contract is pretty good, but he's on a bigger number than just a rookie deal. And so you're looking at those four guys plus Richichet, who's on his rookie deal and isn't going to need a new extension for a while, to keep a group together that you're not sure is better than like 40 to 43 wins in a not that great back of the Eastern Conference. It also depends, like I said, on whether or not Trae Young wants to stay. And if he does ask out, or if the Hawks just decide to trade him, that obviously changes everything about their offseason. We know that they've shopped him a little bit in the past and maybe didn't get a ton of great offers in exchange. And really that just comes down to who's going to be willing to trade stuff for Trae Young, make him the focal point of their team, and give him that huge new contract starting in 2026. A couple of teams that possibly come to mind here are a guard desperate team like the Orlando Magic. That would be weird because those two teams are so close and they play each other so much. And it would just be odd for a team to trade a star that means as much to the Hawks as Trae Young does to basically a rival team. But Orlando certainly would be desperate for some kind of guard help alongside Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner. And importantly, Trae Young can shoot. He can play off the ball for those guys and help their spacing a ton. Doesn't really seem like an Orlando Magic kind of guy given his size and his lack of defense, but that is certainly a possible target, and they've got some assets to trade to Atlanta. Another team would be a team like the Houston Rockets that are going to be involved in pretty much every trade discussion that we have all offseason. We talked about the Kevin Durant stuff, possible Devin Booker stuff. If that doesn't happen, maybe they could see Trae Young as a big upgrade over someone like Fred VanVleet, and really a focal point of their offense, and someone that they have the defensive infrastructure to kind of insulate someone like Trae Young. But again, doesn't really seem like their kind of player, and those just aren't great fits for him. And honestly, as you look around the league, even though I'm not the biggest Trae Young guy, there's not that many great options in terms of a trade and teams that would be willing to give up a ton or give up significant stuff for Trae Young and sign him to a giant new contract starting next season. Teams are just less willing to give out huge max deals to guys that they don't know for sure can lead them to a title. As we've seen with some of the payroll structures around the league, how they've changed with this new CBA, teams are way more cautious about giving out big deals just because a guy seems like a max contract player, which I think is going to cool down the Trae Young market. And as of right now, I think a Trae trade is pretty unlikely unless he simply asks out because I don't think they're going to get a ton back for him. If the Hawks decided, okay, we're going to explore some Trae Young stuff because we don't want to lose him for nothing in the summer of 2026, I'm not sure the return's going to be all that great. So unless they're forced to by Young himself, they probably are not going to be all that aggressive in looking to trade him, which might not be a bad thing. Because like I said, even though I'm not a huge Trae Young fan, him plus Daniels, Johnson, Ricochet, and Okongwu is a pretty good young team, and Trae's still just 26, 27 years old. Now, it would be more fun and more cool if they were all on rookie deals, but that's not really the point. It's going to be expensive to keep this team, and you're not necessarily going to be creating a contender, but the opposite outcome isn't really all that great either. And they could easily convince themselves that they can just grow into this group. They can just continue to wait for Ricochet and Daniels and Jalen Johnson, who got hurt towards the end of the year, Okongwu, and then Trae Young, all these guys to just get better and then maybe make their move down the road if they feel like they have an opportunity. But there is a problem with that if you're Atlanta. They don't have their own first round pick this year in 2025 or in 2027, and those picks are both unprotected to the San Antonio Spurs, and that's as a result of the complete disaster of a DeJounte Murray trade. So in any scenario, either direction you want to go, whether you want to have those picks to possibly trade for a star, whether you want to continue to add young talent, whether you want to tank, not having access to those picks is certainly restrictive. Now, they do have the Lakers 2025 first this year, which is going to be a late first round pick as a result of the DeJounte Murray trade. And they have the Kings 2025 first top 12 protected, which could actually be a late lottery pick for Atlanta if Sacramento doesn't jump up in the lottery. So right now, if that happens, if they get that Kings pick, they've got a late lottery pick, which is essentially their own. It's basically a few spots away, and one late first round pick, which maybe they could move for another piece or just continue to add to the young players on this roster. I could see them looking at potentially a scoring bump kind of player, someone like Malik Monk or DeMar DeRozan from Sacramento, that would allow them to not have as much pressure on Trae Young, still give them a ton of spacing, and potentially just get some value out of one of those late first round picks, maybe if a team like Sacramento is looking to trade some of their guys. But their lack of their own picks does put them in kind of a weird spot, because do you really want to trade Trae Young away and risk giving away a high pick in 2027 if you're not good by then? It kind of restricts their overall timeline in terms of trading away Trae and being a bit more of a rebuilding team. Now, the counter to that is, even though they don't have their own 2025 first, the two firsts that they do have give them a great chance to add more pieces to this core if they don't trade those picks. So it's just kind of a stuck in the middle situation in the offseason for Atlanta without a clear solution. And really, I think this is just a ceiling problem for Atlanta. If you could convince yourself that Trae Young plus those four guys could maybe eventually be a semi-contender, then the path forward is obvious. You keep your first-round picks, you see what can happen with these guys as they develop, and then maybe use them to make your move for a bigger star down the road, and maybe that is the piece that elevates your ceiling. I personally am just not sure that that's ever going to happen for a team whose best player is Trae Young. But again, I'm not a Trae Young fan. So it's much more likely to me that rather than becoming some kind of contender or semi-contender over the next couple of years, they become basically what the Sacramento Kings have been the last couple of years. An exciting offensive team, a regular season team that isn't really going to contend that much for the postseason, and when they get there, isn't going to be all that much of a threat. And if you're a Hawks fan, is that worth keeping around Trae Young, not getting value out of him in a trade, and paying him 60, 70 plus $1 million a year on a new contract? Now, it's not the end of the world scenario, and certainly they'd like to have a competitive team, but probably isn't the path that their fans want to hear. There's two real different paths here, if we're honest. One is, frankly, what I would do. What I would do is I would go around and see what you could get in exchange for Trae Young in a trade. Just see what that market looks like, and if I can get good value from a team like Orlando or Houston or one of these other teams, I would trade him, and I would just build around the core that I have. I'd build around Jalen Johnson, Zachary Ricochet, Dyson Daniels, and Onyeka Okongwu. I'd be flexible with my salaries and try and take on some more first-round picks from other teams that want to dump some money and just continue to add assets to my team. Then I'd hope for good lottery luck in 2026, try and get top 5, top 7 odds for next year, and try and get a high upside core piece that can lead you to things that Trae Young just can't because of his size and his lack of defense, and see how that guy fits into your new core. Then at that point, you hope that you can turn the team around in time to not give away a high 2027 pick, and then use the extra assets from the Trae trade to build an elite young core and then potentially make your move for another star down the road. That's what I would do. But what will probably happen in Atlanta is they're not going to find that much of a market for Trae, and he's going to stay and hope that they give him a giant new extension. They're going to try and build around the current core and then win like 45 games at the most the next few years. Then they're going to try and trade Trae in a few years when he's almost 30 and makes way more money, which just won't work. They won't get nearly as much value, and it will be a huge missed opportunity for them. But honestly, it's a tough situation because they tried to make this happen around Trae Young. Yes, they did get kind of lucky one year and make the Eastern Conference Finals, but we all know they weren't one of the 2 best teams in the conference that year. They just happened to be the 2 last standing Eastern Conference teams. They added Bogdanović and Gallinari to this roster. They paid a bunch of money to guys like John Collins over the years. They made another big move by trading for DeJounte Murray, and it just never quite worked. They were never fully able to capitalize the way a team like the Cleveland Cavaliers have when they traded for Donovan Mitchell. That was their mindset when they traded for DeJounte Murray, and it just hasn't happened. You can't really fault them for trying, and Trae is obviously good. I just think it's hard to build a contender around that player type, and they don't have an obvious player on the roster that is going to supplant him as the best guy on the roster that can take them places that Trae Young simply can't. This is definitely a wait-and-see situation. Things can change really dramatically if they all of a sudden say, hey, Trae Young is available, and then they can see what they can get, or if Trae asks out himself. But right now, it's a very murky situation in Atlanta that isn't like a disaster by any means, but it's very hard to find a clear path to making this a highly competitive team over the next couple of years.